Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event. I've really been looking forward to seeing you all, and I'm really happy you're all here. And I've been looking forward to welcoming the panelists here. I'll introduce you in a moment. There's also, we're actually streaming online right now, live, so welcome to you as well, who are following this event on the other side. Because of COVID-19, we couldn't be that many people here. So also thanks for that, for being here, despite the situation at the moment. 10 days ago, I was so excited and happy to hear that the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to United Nations World Food Programme. What great news in the middle of a pandemic. I was actually in Turkey reporting, wearing a mask, and I was just like, oh, this is great. I was so thrilled, so encouraging and uplifting, so well deserved. At this unprecedented time, I truly believe the United Nations plays a crucial role in underscoring the importance of multilateral cooperation. So it's a great honor to welcome Mr. David Beasley, the Executive Director, World Food Programme. You have literally just arrived from your base in Rome last night. Welcome to Denmark and congratulations. And ladies and gentlemen, let me also welcome the Minister of Development Cooperation, Rasmus Prehn, and Senior Researcher from DIIS, Louise Riis Andersen. In a short while, my three guests here will be discussing the fact that 690 million people around the globe do not know where they're going to get their next meal, or if. And that 60% of those millions of people live in countries affected by conflicts. We will discuss how actors like the World Food Programme may contribute to improve the prospects for peace. But before the debate, I would like to give the word to our host today, Christian Fischer, Director of DIIS.
Thank you very much, Simi. Thank you for that, and welcome to you, of course.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christian Fischer, as Simi said. And let me first of all welcome you all here to DIIS. Can you hear me in the back rows? Perfect. And also a warm welcome to our listeners and viewers following us on the live stream. It's really nice to see that we have such a strong program here today. A very interesting program. With us we have David Beasley, and I would also say congratulations. It's a fantastic piece of news we got 10 days ago. A warm congratulations on behalf of DIIS, not only to you but to your organization and to the many courageous people who works in your organization. You are doing a fantastic job in quite often very dangerous circumstances. So a warm welcome to that. That's very well deserved. And just add one piece of info here. We also, many of us who believe in strong multilateral institutions and strong international agreements, we also see this as a sign, a good sign for international relations. So a warm congratulations to you, and also, of course, on the 75th anniversary of the UN on Saturday, that is. We also have the minister here, Rasmus Prehn. It's good to have you back again. You were here a month ago. It's so good to have you. We're looking very much forward to hearing your take on the World Food Programme and it's very important work. And finally, I should also say that I'm really happy to see Louise here. Louise Riis Andersen, who is well known to I know many of you here, and hopefully also to many people in the following us on via the live streaming. Louise is a senior researcher here. She's a specialist on the UN, and she's a fantastic person to work together with. I will not take more time because you have not come to hear me. Simi, you are
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks. David, I guess you need to say something, right? So the stage is yours.
You know, it's like what when I was in Niger, and we had just come out of the field, and we had ISIS in the south of us, and Al Qaeda in the north of us. We were just a very desperate, volatile framework where we were, and so we come back into the city in Niamey, and we were having a meeting with the government leader, and it was that morning when they made the announcement, and I had no idea at all And so I'm in a meeting, and someone just comes running down the hall, and I hear this noise, and they bust open the door. I'm like, what are you doing busting open the door? We got a meeting. And like, Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm like, oh, yeah, who won it? Who won it? You know, and like, we did. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. It was a complete surprise. And there's no doubt anybody that knows anything about the World Food Program and what we've been facing and have encountered and have done in the last few years, it's well deserved by the men and women that are out there every single day putting their lives on the line. But I think the Nobel Peace Prize Committee was recognizing that, but I also think they were sending a message clearly to the world that food security is becoming one of the most important issues of our time. And quite frankly, 2021 could be one of the worst years very well in the last couple of 100 years, not just since World War II, but 2021 is going to be a very, very bad year. And we can talk about the details later. So I think the fact that we were in the Sahel, and I mean, Rasmus and I had been the day before and the day before, we were in Burkina Faso. We can talk about what's happening in Burkina Faso, why you should be concerned about that, how that will impact your way of life, because it is knocking on your door in the European community. And so to us, it's great to receive the Nobel, but the question now is, how do we take advantage of it to help more people and stabilize more nations around the planet, particularly in the next 12 to 18 months, because it very well is going to be the most volatile, I think, time period since the beginning of the United Nations. And so it's great to be here in Copenhagen. It really is.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions for you, but I'll get back to that in a moment. I think now we need the minister to take the stage and just give us a little short speech. Because we have so much to debate and talk about. I'm so excited.
I actually got a quite long speech here, but there's so many things to say, and especially when you are together with the World Food Program and David Beasley. First of all, I would like to say that I'm really extremely happy to be here together with you, and especially with you, David Beasley. It's really a privilege to receive you here in Copenhagen, and it's really good timing right now with the Nobel Peace Prize. It's really so well deserved. This is an excellent opportunity to talk about the work of World Food Program, David, and how Denmark stands behind your efforts to end hunger. Only 2 weeks ago, David and I were in Burkina Faso together, where we saw firsthand the many challenges facing this country. But we also saw the fantastic work that World Food Program is doing in the field to combat hunger. World Food Program ensures that millions of vulnerable people get their daily meal. World Food Program paved the way for a broader understanding also for me of how food assistance and development cooperation can help improve possibilities for peace. A year ago, I attended an event in the UN city here in Copenhagen, and you were there as well, Simi, on how food assistance could support the creation of peace, also with World Food Program. It was clear then, and it is today, that if we want to create stability and peace in the world, people need food. It sounds simple, but of course it is not. I admire World Food Program for taking up this challenge. This work has earned World Food Program the Nobel Peace Prize 2020. This is a prize so well deserved, David. I express a heartfelt congratulation from my government and myself to you, David, and the whole World Food Program team. It is a great tribute to the many brave women and men working for World Food Program in the midst of conflict and disasters. Imagine bringing food and assistance to more than 100 million hungry people in over 80 countries across the world. And imagine doing it in areas affected by conflict. 60% of the 690 million hungry people around the world live in countries affected by conflict. That's what World Food Programme does. That's without any doubt worthy a Nobel Peace Prize. We met some of the people World Food Programme helps to 2 weeks ago in Burkina Faso. I saw how WFP help local communities and internal displaced people grow crops. This approach is much more sustainable than food aid, and it is not only combating hunger but also preventing conflicts. I have no doubt that World Food Programme in countries like Burkina Faso, but also in Afghanistan, Somalia and many other places, reduce the risk of local conflicts. When people know that they will get a meal tomorrow, they are less inclined to fight the neighbors. Violence and exploitations of women and children also decline when food is available. World Food Programme has shown that food assistance can improve the position of women and girls. This is very much needed. World Food Programme is not only about food. It deals with broader issues in countries and regions torn apart by conflict and disasters. It shows us that fighting hunger and creating peace cannot be addressed by any one of us alone. Humanitarian development and peace-building actors must work together. The crisis must become a catalyst for multilateral increased openness and global solidarity. So much has happened in the last year. The pandemic has created new challenges, so has increased climate change and new conflict. And it is still clear that we will never manage to end hunger unless there is peace. But I see new ways of working, and I see new ideas. I see that World Food Programme is ready to take up the challenges. Therefore, I truly applaud the decision to award World Food Programme the Nobel Peace Prize. Once again, congratulations, David. I'm looking forward to an interesting talk on how food can contribute to improving the prospects for peace. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you. Let's... Rasmus, that was a short speech, I think. Don't you think? It could have been much longer.
It could have been longer, yeah.
Thank you for that. So now we have plenty of time, and just to tell you guys who are here that there will be an opportunity to ask questions later on. There will be a microphone going around, so if you have any questions, please, don't hesitate to ask them. But first of all, David, you just spoiled my whole script here, because my first question to you was supposed to be, how did you react to the great news 10 days ago? You just told us, right? So let me ask something else. Let me ask you, what was the first thing you did? You got so excited. So did you call your wife? Did you call your colleagues? What did you do? Just between us, just like us,
Well, actually, I did call my wife, and she was in Austin, Texas. It was 3 a.m, and it was really interesting because I probably shouldn't even say this, but she had this really bad dream the night before, and she never has anything like that. She said, I had this really bad dream that something really bad happened where you were. And she never does that. And so when the phone rang at 3 a.m. in Austin, Texas, and she saw me dialing, she was like, oh my God, something's happened. And then I couldn't speak because I was really so emotional. Then she knew something had really happened. And then I said, the Nobel Peace Prize. And that was the first person I called.
Were you in tears?
Oh, yeah, really. I was so joyous. But then when I went to call my wife, I kind of teared up. I was at the window by myself, and
Why, David? Why? Because it's a big moment, and it's very emotional. Why was it so emotional? Because I guess it's beyond you and your family, and it's so big.
Yeah. It's because it wasn't about me, or it was bigger than WFP. Mm-hmm. The world really is in a crossroads, and to me, it was like, thank you. This is exactly what we needed to help jumpstart a massive campaign to address what we're going to face in the next 12 to 18 months. It's one thing to look at the long-term solutions with things that Rasmus and I have been working on and working with this great nation, but what we're facing the next 12 to 18 months is going to require something really magnificent. And this was like, oh God, it was like a gift from above. And the fact that we were in the Sahel when we received the phone call, I think was just a gift among gifts to let the world know, because we weren't in Rome, we weren't in Copenhagen. We were actually out in the field where people are struggling and starving in war. And it was just, we couldn't have scripted it any better. And so I was just emotional because I was like, we needed that to really sensitize the world what we're really facing. I mean, what we are facing is a calamity coming.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, because you're used to being on the ground. I mean, you travel a lot all around the world. You see what's happening, and you keep saying about the next 12, 18 months. Can you elaborate? What is it that's going to make 2020 the worst year?
Rasmus can tell you, for the last 3 years, I've been beating the drums about the Sahel especially, about troubles coming. When you feed 100 million people, you know what's going on in the neighborhood. If I fed 5 million people in the Copenhagen area, I don't know how many people there are in the Copenhagen area, but if I fed all the people here for 3 years, I'd know what's going on in your neighborhood. And when you feed 100 million people, you know what's going on in the neighborhood of Syria, of Yemen, of Iraq, of Mali, of Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, and let me just keep going around the world. And so we see movements of people. We see things deteriorating way in advance before it's measurable, to such a degree that institutions can draw conclusions based upon data. And you're out there and you feel it, you see it, you experience it. And I'm out in the field all the time. I spend about 1/3 of my time in Rome, and 1/3 of my time in capitals raising money, and 1/3 of my time out in the field, because that's where the heartbeat is. And so when I arrived, we were raising about $16 million a day, and my goal then was, privately, I wanted to raise $1 million an hour, and so I managed my time accordingly. And so, and I do. When I get off that plane, everything is down to the detail, because every minute makes a difference, and that extra $1 million, $2 million per day means more children live. That's how I look at it. That's how we look at it. Now, so when I arrived, we were 80 million people we were serving. There were 80 million people around the world on the brink of starvation, not chronically hungry. That's the number you were talking about, that really don't know necessarily where the next meal may be. But that number spiked from 80 million 3 years ago to this year, pre-COVID, 135 million. 135 million who don't know whether they're going to survive or not. They're on the brink of starvation, marching towards that line. And that first question you ask is, why? Well, as you said, 60% of these people are in man-made conflict areas. That's what's driving those numbers up. 80% of our expenditures now are in war zones, conflict areas. Imagine if we could take that money and put it into development, strictly development in fragile environments where we could stabilize sustainable and resilience type programs. And so now last year, toward the end of last year, I kept telling leaders that 2020 is going to be your worst humanitarian year in a long, long time. And I would break it down by the regions around the world. And the leaders were like, oh my gosh, we just hadn't really thought about it comprehensively. Well, then COVID comes along. And so Tony Blair had called me. This was before I gave that sort of earthquake speech to the United Nations Security Council back in April, which is, leaders around the world are focused on COVID in a vacuum. And the ripple effect is going to be 100 times more devastating if you shut down the economy, shut down the supply chain. If we don't deal with these issues together, integrated response. And so Tony called me and said, right before I gave this speech, and I wasn't going to give that speech until Tony called me, he says, what do you see out there? He said, you're out there more than anybody around the world, more than anybody. What do you see? And I said, Tony, it's not good. So I broke it down into about a dozen countries over the next 4 quarters. And when I started breaking it down, Tony was like, oh my God. He said, this is unbelievable. You've got to speak to the Security Council about this. And so I ratcheted it ratcheted it up, and as you know, I have a reputation. I don't speak the UN lingo, and it catches me grief from time to time. But you know, I like to speak the language that common people understand. People are dying; they're starving to death. They don't need to know the complex formulas for what we do on the United Nations, on the acute security, you know, all these different. I can't even pronounce half the acronyms around there. I mean, I'd go to the meetings my first few months in the United Nations, and I walk out of a meeting, and I'm like, "What the heck did they say?" Because all this UN lingo, and so I like to kind of make things simple, and I think the taxpayers for Denmark, for Germany, for the U.S., they like that simple language. Because why should a taxpayer in Denmark send money down to Chad or Niger? And when you explain it to them in the simple terms, it's like, they get it.
But can you explain that in simple terms? I mean, just like very briefly, like which are the areas which are going to be most affected by?
Context is a simple example, like Syria, a nation of 21 million people. You had war, had the European international community going in advance and stabilize things. Well, we feed a Syrian in Syria for about 50 cents a day. That same Syrian in Brussels or Berlin, is the humanitarian support package is 50 to 100 euros per day. And the Syrian doesn't want to be, not that they don't like Berlin or Brussels, but who wants to move from home? They don't want to leave home. But if they don't have food security, they don't have some degree of peace, they go do what every single one of us would do for our children. You go get to where it takes, and they'll move 2, 3, 4 times inside the country before they'll finally leave out of desperation. And so, take the Sahel area, or the greater Sahel, as I say, from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. That's 500 million people. If you destabilize 500 million people with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and all the exploitation from climate extremes that's taking place, well, if you're not going to do it out of the goodness of your heart, you better do it out of your national security interest. And a lot of folks don't like it in the U.S. when I say that. I'm like, well, it's the reality. It's the truth. That's where we are. And we have programs we can go into places. This is what I love about working with Denmark, because with Denmark, we get multi-year flexible funding that allows us to generate the type programs, because my goal is to put the World Food Program out of business. That's what I want. I want the United Nations not to have to be there, or NGOs not to need to be there, because we've created sustainable systems. And when you go into these areas and we can break this down, I mean, down to the ground with the families that we're talking about, when they are struggling, they got flash floods, they got droughts, they got climate change coming on top of them, they got fragile environment, they got now ISIS and Al-Qaeda trying to recruit and using food as a weapon of recruitment. And if we can come in there with food for asset programs, rehabilitate the land, capture the water, put on a school meals program on top of that, amazing what happens. Migration drops off the chart. Teen pregnancy and the marriage rate of 12-year-olds drops off the chart. Recruitment by ISIS and Al-Qaeda drops off the chart. And you can economically determine those cost factors. It's a lot cheaper to go in and do it right. And it's like the Titanic's heading out in the sea, and you got these big icebergs. And sometimes those of us get consumed with the broken teacup in the ballroom and the cracked tile in the bathroom. And I'm like, hey, and I know that's not good, but we got an iceberg coming here. And right now, the world's got to wake up, because we've got a couple icebergs heading our way, and there's not going to be enough money next year. And I think we need to talk about that a little bit later. Why?
And David, I mean, for that, you need the political will, because without the political will, there's no WFP.
No, that's right.
So,
it's going to cost you one way or the other. One way is going to cost you 1,000 times more,
exactly,
than doing it right on the front end and creating stability and peace.
And that just leads me to you, Rasmus. I mean, as a minister, I mean, from the perspective of Denmark, I mean, where do you see Denmark's role in avoiding hunger and food crisis, and how to support the mission David is on, which is important for all of us?
First of all, I would like to say that I'm 100% agreeing with David on his analysis. It's much more cheap to start at the right beginning and help where the problem's starting. And Denmark is among the biggest donors to World Food Program. And we are not only that, we are also trying to inspire a new and more clever ways to spend the money. So that's really our approach, is to go in and inspire other countries to do the same, but also inspire the work in a way that we can work in a more clever way. And I think it's very important to understand, and that's one of the reasons that I'm so happy that World Food Program have got the Nobel Peace Prize, because now we can really tell the story about how peace and hunger is combined. That if we want to solve many of the problems, it's really about giving out food, but not only giving out food, also creating a situation where the people in need, they have skills and opportunities to grow their own food.
But Rasmus, as a minister, how do you convince the Danish taxpayers about this?
It exactly as David is saying. It's about putting it very simple. Say we can't accept people living in starvation. It's unacceptable, and I think many Danes have it in that way, that we will never accept seeing people in starvation. Remember in the 80s when I was a kid, and we saw the children from the Tigray province in Ethiopia, the small children with this huge stomach because they were in starvation. And so many Danes were engaging themselves in collecting money because they wouldn't accept this phenomenon. And we simply have to do the same here. But also to tell them, if we don't do it, we will end up having a problem that is much bigger. And the migration problems we saw 5 years ago, they will just multi-double if we don't deal with this. And that is the reason that we have to act now. And tomorrow, Denmark is the host of a huge conference focusing on Sahel. When I was in Burkina Faso and Mali the first time in January this year, I went home and I said, we simply have to be the country who inspire the rest of the world to take responsibility. And now tomorrow we have a huge international donor conference, and we are aiming to secure more money, but not only that, also to inspiring much more political awareness of the problem.
Rasmus, I totally get all that, and I think we all agree on your ambitions and your visions, but you know, there's a huge difference from the 80s. If you were the minister then, it would have been much easier to sell this story about starving kids in Africa. Today you have the social media, you have the 24-hour news channels. We are occupied with like different issues in Denmark. We don't care about what's happening in the world. I mean, how do you manage, I mean, isn't it a difficult challenge to sell this story or to sell this vision to get people to understand that don't just be happy about living in a peaceful country in Denmark, you have to care about what's happening around the world because it can affect your life. I mean, just to be very brief and concrete about that, that must be a big challenge from your point of view.
It is indeed a big challenge, no doubt about that. But fortunately, we have a situation where a very broad coalition in the Danish parliament are backing our funding to, for instance, World Food Program. And when we saw the COVID-19 situation, we were actually able to have a very broad coalition within the Danish parliament, freeing up 1 billion Danish kroner to take initiatives towards not only the COVID-19 itself, but all the linked consequences, as David just told us about, that when you have the close down, you will have a problem with handing out food because the infrastructure simply didn't work. So therefore, I was really happy to see that so many political parties within the Danish parliament were backing this prioritization. And I also believe that if we engage more Danish people in this debate and try to tell the stories as they are, of course Danish people will step up and to do their share. And one of my aims as minister is also to support all the many Danes who are doing daily solidarity works. We are one of the countries with most volunteer working people in the world. They are standing in recycle shops and things like that to collect money also for developing countries. So we are a country of international solidarity, and that will inspire many others to do the same.
David, we are a country of international solidarity, the minister is saying. Many people would agree in that. But I guess that's not the same you meet everywhere else in the world. You must be facing challenges with countries who are not that into helping. How do you deal with that?
No, you deal with it head on. And
I mean, you can't threaten people to pay you money or
no,
support you.
but
I mean, how do you do it? It must be...
Well, when I arrived, I mean, you had a lot of question about was the United States going to back down its multilateral commitment to the World Food Program. At the time of our budget of $5.8 billion, that was $5.9 billion in 2016. We were receiving about $1.9 billion from the United States. So I immediately went to both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, to the White House and then to the Senate, particularly the Senate, Democrat and Republican leadership, and sat down with both ends, explained where we were, what we need to do, and here's why. And our budget went up from $1.9 billion to $3.4 billion from the United States. Then I also went then immediately where? To Germany. I mean, the biggest place to go was to, we were seeing the fight between a lot of the conservatives who were saying, we're sending too much money to foreign aid, we're not doing enough money at home, or whatever the case may be. So we went to the German Bundestag. And so, as well as the UK, as well as Canada, and meeting with the leaders on all sides of the aisles and explaining in their language. And so if I was talking to a foreign affairs committee in a particular country, I would ask the left, give me a little leeway to speak the language to them. I said, please let me do that. And by the time I'd get through the conversation, I'd have everybody together. We get it. We see it, you know. And I think it's just being really candid and laying it out. But you can't just speak with candidness. You also got to be able to speak with authority. You know what you're talking about, and here's what's going to happen if we don't do this. We've got the programs to do this. My biggest problem has been, and I've been hard on my friends in the media about this. When you turn on the news in the last 3 years, it has been nothing but, it doesn't matter whether you love or hate either of these scenarios. It was either Brexit, 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 or Trump, Trump, Trump. And now it's Brexit, now it's COVID, 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 and Trump, Trump, Trump. And to break through that has just been so problematic, because I know the heart of the European people and then people in the United States and in North America. If they know that people are suffering out there, they will dig deeper and say, hey, I want to help those people. But when they don't know, because, you know, all of the news media today, and then this is, I don't know if this is going to bring an end to democracy or not yet. It's a frightening thought about, because we use this out in the field in a lot of ways to feed people. But the social media today, I mean, it's frightening where it's going, and the deception and the propaganda. And the young people, your generation, you got to figure that thing out. You know, I mean, you really do. It's so many good things. It's like a knife. You can be used for good things, and it can be used for bad things. And we got to figure that out. But that's another discussion.
Yeah.
For another
I have so many
job.
questions. I just want to have Louise on board as well. Sorry about that. I just got carried away from my script and everything. Problem. I mean, if we try to look at the multilateral cooperation, which we were talking about earlier, I assume we all agree that that is important and vital for the world. However, we are in the middle of the pandemic that is indeed showing us how disagreements are somehow threatening the global unity even more, or challenging it at least. Louise, how do you view the future when, for example, the UN Security Council cannot agree on everything, many things? Europe is divided in many things. I mean, what challenges do you see from your point of view?
Well, there are so many challenges, and just to add to the rather glim presentation we've seen on what 21 will be like, I think we are at a pivotal point where there is just so much need for international cooperation. All the problems we're facing, regardless of whether they are food security. Also, if you look at food security, where does it come from? It's climate change, violent conflicts that have been left to fester. So, I mean, these issues cannot be dealt with by any country on their own. And I think that is sort of evident to anyone who works on international affairs or all kinds of problems. But the thing is that right now, even though you talk about how Europeans and Americans are good at heart, we also have this tendency right now to be more inward looking, and COVID-19 has reinforced that dynamic, that we have enough problems on our own. Exactly. And the economic recession is reducing the willingness to spend on people away from your own sort of communities. So I think it's quite a crucial or a critical point we're at right now, where it's not make or break, but it's a very critical crisis. And you could say, okay, so there will be a couple of rough years, and then we will get through it, because there's this logic of necessity that will somehow make international cooperation revitalize and begin again. But the problems we're facing, both with climate security, with climate change, climate crisis, and food security, are so tremendous that we don't have a couple of years to get sorted out and to get, over the various issues that are facing us at home. And I think that's the main difficulty, that we're running out of time. That seems a little alarmist, but it is. I think that's pretty much where we are. So I'm not an optimist right now.
No, and I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you as well, David. Many challenges ahead. I mean, I want to be very concrete right now. I mean, I want to hear from you, what is it you need? I mean, if you can be very concrete about it from the world community in order to help your work. I know, of course, you need the money and the political will, but it's also like, for example, let's say Syria. We all know that there's so many countries and parties involved in that war. How do you deal with the conflicting partners while you also have to maintain your neutral stance? I mean, you were mentioning before, you've been to the Security Council meetings, you see what's happening behind the doors. I mean, how do you stay neutral and at the same time tell them to stop with these conflicts?
Yeah. Sometimes I'm accused of not being so neutral, and I'm not neutral when it comes to humanitarian rights. When it comes to nations, we're as neutral as we can possibly be. But let me be very clear, and I've told the Secretary General, I said, if you need to fire me, don't hesitate to fire me. But I'm going to say some things that need to be said. And we were in Yemen a few years ago. We're in Yemen. We're feeding 13 million people. And you had the blockade by the coalition.
Yes.
Well, you remember, I mean, I was brutal. I mean, I just didn't back down, and everybody was running for the hills. I can't believe you're attacking the coalition. I'm like, look, we've got a blockade. People are dying. You can't do this. And so everybody in New York was heading. Anyway, nobody wanted to be seen near me.
But that's a concrete example of the dilemmas you are in, I mean, you want to help people, and there's blockades, and you have to take
You got to speak
tough
the truth.
decisions.
If you speak the truth with your heart, I think it works out. But again, that was a tough time. And then the Houthis got so excited that I was jumping on the coalition. And when I met with the Houthi leadership, I said, look, I'm not doing this because I like you. I said, you cross this line, I'm going to, anyway, I said other things, but I said, I'm going to jump on your back too. I said, you need to understand that. And then 2 years later, I was busting their chops in the news media. And when you speak the truth, then other sides realize, well, okay, here are UN leaders now. At least they're being fair. They're speaking the truth. And I think the UN is at a crossroads right now. I really do, to prove that it is at the table making an impact around the world today. And I do believe it is. But the number one thing that needs to be done right now, and this is, I've said this, and I know Rasmus has heard me speak in some of the big forums, is that there's so many problems out there. It's like you're playing that little game, Guacamole or whatever it's called. Everybody's just running, popping, just touching it, and nobody's dealing with it deeply. And I've been saying, look, we got to slow down and just solve one. Solve Syria, it's solvable. Solve Yemen, it's solvable. And then once you solve one, you've got one out the way. Now, and I mean the international community, the leaders around the world coming together and figuring out and doing it and getting one or two of these major crises solved. Once you do that, it's going to be amazing. You'll start seeing the world at the glass is no longer half empty, it's half full again, and we will be moving in the right direction, because I have no doubt we can end hunger around the world. With the amount, you got $370 trillion worth of wealth. We got the expertise, we got the technology to do it. But with man-made conflict, you'll never do it. And you compound that with climate extremes, we can avert famine and starvation even with climate extremes at the present time if we can end the wars.
But David, that's my question. I mean, it sounds you know,
I'm
like,
hopeful.
okay, we
I'm hopeful.
I'm
really
happy you're
hopeful.
optimistic. You have to be in your position. But how do you, you know, get all the world powers to agree on Syria, who are involved in arming different groups and, you know, are involved in a war where there's so many interests at stake? I mean, how can you just say that that is, of course, it's endable, but how can you do it? How do you put pressure on the different parties?
Well, when I have my, I don't want to get into details, I can't, but when I have my private meetings with leaders,
It's just between us. You can. It's okay.
I'll say things that normally aren't said. I mean, I will actually run everybody out the room and talk with a leader and say, I want to talk to you heart to heart. It's time to end some of these wars. It's time for you to step up and do this. And I don't want to get into those details because that is, as you can imagine, sensitive. But those are the conversations that have to be had. We have to peel, I think, to the interest and the heart of some of these leaders to realize we can't just keep running around talking about issues. We got to go down deep and solve. You know, on climate change, you know, I have a lot of my friends on the conservative side who just don't agree about some of the issues on climate change. But when they hear me, I'll say, look, I'm not asking you to conclude and agree with what's causing it to change, but I want to show you on the ground what's happening. Now, you can debate all day long what's causing it. But I've got solutions on the ground that's going to allow people to survive while you have flash flooding, while you have droughts. But unless those people go die if we keep just doing nothing about it. And so you'll get a shift to then you can actually solve something.
But David,
Yeah.
WFP is not a peace-building actor.
Yes, we are.
Are you?
We use food as a weapon of peace. And when I've got 100 million people that we're feeding, trying to scale up to 138 million people, and I don't have enough money to do what we need to do. And this was on 60 Minutes when I were talking about this earlier. Scott Pelley, we had just come out of the field. It was a major show on 60 Minutes on Yemen. And we were finishing up the final interview for the production. And Scott was taking off the mic from me, and he says, he calls me Governor. He says, Governor, you got the greatest job on earth. And I said, Scott, I do. I said, but I'm going to say something that you hadn't thought of, and it's going to bother you. And he was like, what in the world could that be? And I said, Scott, I don't go to bed at night thinking about the children we saved. I'll go to bed at night thinking about the children we couldn't get to because we didn't have money or access. And I said, when we don't have the money we need, we have to choose who eats and who doesn't eat, which children live or which children die. I said, how would you like that job, Scott? And he looked at me and said, oh, my God, I've never thought about it. I said, well, we have to think about it every day. And I said, it keeps me up every single night. So when we don't have enough money because of war and conflict, I'm going to use food as a weapon of peace every chance I can. We've used it in places. We've done it down in Sudan. We've done it down in South Sudan. We've done it in other locations. We bring tribal enemies together. We use food as a weapon to bring folks together, whereas others want to use food as a weapon of division and war and conflict. And so we do. And until they solve these wars, I cannot sit idly by and let children die because we don't have enough money because the leaders aren't getting it done. And so where we can, we will. And I wish I could actually go into 4 or 5 really complex situations, which we're in the middle of now, and discussing how we're using food in relationships. Because when you feed people, you develop relationships. You do. And then you start building trust. And then you can start having a dialogue. And it's amazing what happens. We have teams, not at the high level now, we're presidents and prime ministers and whatever, but whether it's out in the field in Burkina Faso or Niger, where we got to negotiate between Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and access between tribes and things. And our people have to know how to do that because if they can't, well, you know, you can see the numbers, how many people get killed in our sphere every year. It's horrible.
David,
but anyway.
Sorry to interrupt. This just leads me to the question that, you know, recently you called for private actors to contribute.
Yeah,
I mean, that they have an obligation to contribute. Why do you need the support from them? I mean, are the states of the world not enough?
If I get into the long answer here, because this is the problem. In the year 2020, I mean, my budget, or the amount of monies that I've raised in this year is about $8.5 billion by the end of the year. 2019 was a strong economic year. So the budgets were all appropriated in 2019 based upon economic outlook for 2020. Well, everything was good then. Well, guess what? 2020 hits the corner. COVID comes on, economic deterioration, $17 trillion worth of economic stimulus packages have been spent. Our money has been appropriated. Countries dug deeper to give us more money for 2020, hoping this thing would be out of the way by 2021. We deferred a debt service for all low and middle income countries, $8 trillion worth of debt service deferred until January 2021, so that low and middle income countries could put that debt service towards safety net programs in countries, because obviously, you know, you've got 2, 3, 4 weeks worth of food in your pantry. You might not like what you're eating in week 3, but these people live hand to mouth. If you do a lockdown or shutdown, you're going to have destabilization, conflict, and migration. And so when you look also that $100 and more billion worth of remittances is now gone, 2 billion people in the informal economy, 459 million jobs lost, quantified by the World Bank and others as a result of COVID, the economic deterioration taking place globally, the impact, the loss of tourism in countries like Ethiopia, 0 now. Oil prices down, Nigeria, Sudan. And so when I start breaking it down, and then, because when you look at the fact that we are moving that number of food insecure, severe, on the brink of starvation, 135 to 270 million people, I can quantify that country by country by country and break it down why it's going to happen. Here's what's going to take place in the next 12 months. And so I don't think it's going to be reasonable that we're going to be looking back to the same governments to double up the money, because it's just not going to be there. Now, having said that, and I'm all for people making money, but the billionaires that have made billions, I'm not asking them to give us $10 billion every year for the next 10 years. They've made billions during COVID. And my God, at a time like this when we need your help, show the world you care about them. Put just some of your money. I mean, you got three U.S. billionaires that are worth $1 trillion. I mean, come on. Come on. I'm not asking you for $50 billion. Just give me $5 billion to keep 30 million people.
Are they willing to give you the money?
I'm hoping. And once the U.S. elections are over with and I can get some penetration, I'm going to ratchet it up pretty hard, because the world's at stake. I mean, it really is. There's 2,189, something like that, billionaires in the world with something like $10.2 trillion worth of wealth. And with $370 trillion worth of global wealth, a single child shouldn't go to bed hungry on earth. Not one. But the next 12 months, I normally am not pushing the private sector for this particular sphere. What Rasmus and we've been talking about, we need, and this is a one-time phenomenon, I need the private sector engaged on the ground and bring in food security, better crop, better practices, and help us transform an economy, agriculturally and otherwise. That is what we want. That's what I want the private sector to be doing. Take the success of the private sector in Denmark, in the United States, in Germany, and help us on the ground in Mali, in Chad, in Ghana, in these places, and let's transform the economy so that you don't need outside support. Now, that's a longer term. That's what I wanted to be working on this year, but we got distracted with this COVID thing.
Rasmus, I guess you agree in this. I mean, is this the way forward? Is that the recipe?
Definitely. And when you hear the need, you can simply understand that there's really a necessity to mobilize as many as possible. And I really support David's call for solidarity, also among the richest one. But just to add something, I would like to say that sometimes the companies, they also have the technology, the knowledge, and the ideas how to solve this. And that is what we need as well. Take a very well-known company as the Danish Grundfos. They are specialists in pumps. When you drill for water, you can use those pumps with solar cells and everything to pump up water. And we know that one of the best ways to create better lives is to secure the access to water. And that is one of the reasons that the Danish government had said that we would provide water to as many people in Africa as we are in Denmark, just as an aim. And working with giving young Africans the skills, vocational training, to learn how to drill after water, and to learn how to, deal with pumps and repair them when they don't function any longer. And working together with a company, for instance, like Grundfos, but also with local companies, then you can build up an economy and an infrastructure that actually solve the problems. And not only the problem with the water, but also the problem with better agriculture, better lives, better skills, decent jobs. So that's a way to insist on doing development from the right beginning. So here you have a humanitarian crisis. Instead of just going in with trucks and water on it, then you should insist on drilling after water right there. And private companies could be a part of that. And I could mention other examples, but it's so clear an example with Grundfos, who have pumps, who can be driven on solar cells. Why on earth don't do that? And then have, much better agriculture, much better livelihood, much better everything. We can do that.
I just want to ask you a last question, Louise, before I open the floor for questions. Louise, when you involve non-state actors, are there any challenges in that? From your point of view?
Well,
or if you become dependent on them, or
yes. There are. Non-state actors are an integral part of the humanitarian sector. They've been from the get-go, including philanthropy. And I think philanthropy, it's there. It will be there forever. But I think right now, if we look at the fact that we need billionaires to step up, I think that's also a sign that states are not stepping up. It's not just that. There's a reason why the billionaires are making so much money. And states don't have money. There's something with the international tax system, for instance. And I think this is just an example of some of the deeper, more structural causes that we are not addressing when we're focusing too much on the symptoms and dealing with them. And the problem is that we have the symptoms right in our face right now, and we need to deal with them, like food security. But if we focus only on the symptoms, we lose sight of sort of the other and more longer-term solutions, which are not just longer-term for the individual community which we're reaching out to, but sort of for the wider transformation of the globe and how to make the entire world sustainable, and not just having sustainable interventions here and there in places where things have gone badly or wrong in a very bad way. So I think it's more that element we need to include. And also there's another aspect in inviting billionaires too much into public spheres. Is what's the accountability system? How do you keep them politically accountable of their engagement? It's a good thing to get their money, but what kind of power are we also giving them? And I think this is more sort of some more abstract questions, you could say. But I think we need to have them in mind as well, that it's not just about solving political or immediate issues at hand, but also what are the longer term effects of the short term solutions we choose here and now, because we don't have anywhere else to look.
Many things to discuss, and we could have kept on. But I just really want to hear if there's anyone here who have a question or two questions, or no? Oh yeah, I think I'll take the mail over there. You on the corner. The microphone, you can ask the question, and please do not touch the microphone because of COVID-19. We're just taking some precautions. Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers. If you could introduce yourself, please. Thank you.
I'm Daniel from the Danish Mission Council Development Department. So I represent a lot of Danish civil society organizations. And I hear about public-private partnerships here, but what do you do to include civil society in the more longer-term efforts? How do you coordinate the World Food Programs in crisis? Because there's a short-term perspective and a longer-term perspective where civil society has a huge role to play traditionally, and how do you deal with that?
David, do you want to?
If I heard it right, but I think one thing, the United Nations shunned the private sector too far, too long, versus integrating them within the system of solutions around the world. Philanthropy will never solve these problems by itself, though philanthropy is extremely important. There's got to be an integration of the private sector and engagement out there in the field. And that doesn't mean just giant corporations either. That's small, middle, and large. As to our engagement, the way I see things, okay, I'd like to have some of their funds right now. Great, that's wonderful, okay. But I'm less interested in that. And we do a lot of collaborate. We're one of the largest supply chain operations in the world. I mean, we're moving billions of dollars, around the world of food and ships and trucks and airplanes. And we're the supply chain backbone, the humanitarian logistics backbone for COVID. 172 countries, 45,000 metric tons of supplies, 24,000 passengers, doctors, nurses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not many people realize that. So we use the private sector to be more efficient, more effective in terms of our internal operations. And how do we use, private sector with regards to this technology? We use blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, satellite imagery in so many different ways. And it's quite remarkable to see how we integrate the private sector in terms of our internal operations to be more efficient, because our team wants to know for every dollar we save, I know this is not a normal, you hear probably the UN, we can feed 4 children. It's 25 cents a meal for a little child. So that's how we think. Now, aside from us being more efficient, then the question is, how does the private sector need to engage out there where there's trouble? Better market opportunities, of course, but if it's so destabilized. And so one of the things that I'm talking with some of the big companies right now is I think the big corporations around the world, period, are more sensitive to social responsibility today than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now, when you understand how Wall Street works and how return on investment and all that works, with stockholders and investors want to know that they go, all right, we're going to put in $500 million into this new venture. They want to know what's going to be their return on investment at certain time periods. And so what I'm asking is, I want you to revisit your portfolio of analysis, working with your stockholders and your investors, and we're in the beginning of these discussions, so that, yes, I understand if you're investing in Denmark, you're investing in Europe, you expect certain return on your investment. But if you go down into Africa and certain places of Africa and expect that return on investment in the next 5 years, that ain't going to happen. So why don't you take a longer view, expect less return on the investment, engage the smallholder farmers and communities more strategically, making you, yes, arguably more inefficient to a certain degree in the short term, but you're integrating the community and society on the long term, and it will be more profitable for you if you'll take a longer view and take that less return on investment as a part of your social responsibility to help build systems that change the dynamics. Let me kind of, from the really bad news to the really good news. 200 years ago, 1.1 billion people on Earth. 90 to 94% of the people were in extreme poverty. Think about it. We have built systems in the last 200 years that's delivered more wealth and success, less poverty, less starvation than any time period in world history. Now, try telling that to the 90 million people that are going to bed chronically hungry, or the 270 that are on the brink of starvation. You don't want to tear down the systems that have given us such success with 90%. But you don't give up on that 8, 9, 10%. We've still got to work on how do we get to those people? How do we help them? How do we bring them into the system? And that's a good debate. It's just like I say, if I can end migration by necessity, then the migration issue becomes a pleasant debate. But when it's based on migration by necessity, it's a very, it's a tough thing. So the private sector, in my opinion, is key going forward. And you got to find these balancing acts out. And these are healthy debates. And so I'm engaging that around the world with the private sector. And I had planned to make this year the private sector, we're moving to a whole other level, but we had a little distraction here.
I just want to have a last question, just very short. Did you still want to ask a question? Or there's also someone else in the back or whatever.
Hello, congratulations. My name is Inga Marie Venice. I work for the resident coordinator in Tehran, actually online because of COVID. And I used to work for WFP in Nigeria and Iraq as well.
Oh, wow.
And I left Nigeria about 18 months ago. And back then, we had Boko Haram, of course, in the northeast and at the outskirts of the Sahel. And now I somehow have monitored or followed a little bit, and now we have ISIS people in the northeast of Mozambique, and now you are pronouncing ISIS. I haven't heard that so concretely for the Sahel before. And you were sort of indicating at the beginning when you started speaking that 500 million people would do what?
Yeah.
If they are on that. I'm sort of thinking about the European gates and
exactly. And
yeah,
this is, as I was telling the European community 2 years ago, if you were worried about 21 million, you wait till you have destabilized 500 million people, especially with the Red Sea, when you know how they're crossing the Red Sea, and now you got the portal potentials of the or Atlantic side, and you got Libya now completely destabilized, and you've got, I mean, we can show you the mapping on the trade routes. Sex trade, slave trade, guns, drugs, you name it. Yes. And so we're giving the speeches on this now. And so you've got ISIS now in like Burkina Faso. Who would have ever thought? But you got ISIS, you got different Al-Qaeda operatives, and there's a little war going on in northern Burkina Faso right now between groups, but that's a different discussion. But when you look at Burkina Faso, the map, it was in the last couple of years just a little bit of activity on the border because of Mali, and you know when the Libya fell apart, all the weapons just flowed down into the Niger and Mali, and then a lot of the Al Qaeda and other terrorists, whatever you want to call them, everybody don't use that. Well, that's what they are, And so I'm not neutral about that, but I do have to be neutral when I work with them so that I can get access, But so they've been moving back and forth between the lines. Well, that was just in the northern part of Burkina Faso. A year ago, we had 300,000 IDPs. Now, 1.2 million IDPs. We were feeding a couple 100,000 people, over food insecure. Now we're 3.3 million severely food insecure, just Burkina Faso, and now we're feeding 1.8 million. This is in the last year. Now, at the northern part of Burkina Faso, on the border with Mali and Niger, was primarily Al-Qaeda and other operatives. Well, now you go on around, you've got more extremist groups going on the side of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, etc. And you come on down to the south now, and that's where you got ISIS. And guess what? That's where the resources are. And guess what? They're now controlling some of the gold operations now. And they're extracting tolls, they're making money, and they are... No, it's not a good situation, and I don't want to get in that here, but there's going to have to be a security component now for us to be able to come in and stabilize some of these areas. And how expensive, how the cost for security on military, and that's not us, but that is 1,000 times more expensive than what we do. Well, now we can't do what we would normally do at a lot less price because in the ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they shutting us off in access, and when they shut us off, they recruit using food. And we've got to get to these. If we can get into these areas, we can stabilize it and minimize death, migration, and recruitment.
And that just summarizes the fact that you have to use food as a weapon in your job.
That's
exactly. Unfortunately, David and Louise and Rasmus, I mean, we could have continued. I guess everyone has, been very happy to hear your views, and especially you, David. We're very, very honored that you came all the way to meet us as well. And I think for me, at least, it was very useful, and I really feel that I've learned a lot today. I'm really inspired. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that all of you enjoyed this session as well, this talk. So I would like to say thank you to all of you for taking time to being here, and I wish you all the best of luck, and I wish you just take care of yourself in these times, and I would really like to thank all the three of you for your interesting views and insight information, and thank you, Mr. Rasmus, thank you, David, and thank you, Louise. Let's thank you so much. And And David, continue your important work. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
It's great to be
You're
here.
a man on a mission.
Well, that indeed.
Thank you so much.